Welcome, everyone, to Queer Poem a Day, Year 5 Capstone Lecture. I'm Dylan Zavagno, Adult Services Coordinator at the library and host of the Deerfield Public Library podcast, where I interview authors, artists, and academics from Chicagoland and around the world. And where each June we host Queer Poem a Day, a daily poetry podcast for Pride Month written and read by contemporary queer poets. What is the Queer Poem a Day Capstone Lecture? Well, near the end of each season, poet and professor Lisa Hiton and I, my co-director and co-founder on Queer Poem a Day, we each give a little talk on our reading of the poems this year. These are, of course, not definitive readings, and we encourage everyone to get their own meaning and pleasures out of the poems. But it's always interesting for us to see what themes emerge each year and follow our reader's mind, making connections and meanings as the poems seem to speak to each other. We don't give any instruction to the poets. They can send us previously published or new poems, and though, of course, contingencies abound, I always think of Queer Poem a Day as a kind of yearbook. What emerged from the poetic minds in 2025 this year? So here is my capstone lecture. I'm going to share my Rick Barrett's poem. Oh, I should also say I'm just showing sometimes excerpts of the poems here. So you can, of course, go read the full poem at deerfieldlibrary.org/queerpoemaday, or hear the poets read it on the Deerfield Public Library podcast feed. Okay, here's my lecture. Rick Barrett's poem, Pleasure, opens with a common queer experience. You are told to believe in one paradise, and then there is the paradise you come to know. In other words, you are told to believe in one kind of life or afterlife, a way of living according to traditions or texts, religious or cultural, which promise their paradise and which might not include you, set against a different, more real paradise, as immediate as the body, called pleasure, the one you come to know. Well, religious imagery and language is one of the most pervasive traditions we have in English poetry, and a good many of the poems in the past 5 years of Queer Poem a Day have employed these themes. For whatever reason, in 2025, more of our participating poets than any other year before were thinking about God. Another example where the immediacy of the body unsettles or reinterprets the promises of the religious texts appears in Jessica Jacobs's poem Sunday Services at the Provincetown Shore, in which a group of picnicking lesbians watch men cruising the beach. The poem ends, no matter what Leviticus says, pursing tight its prurient verses, these men too are taking a kind of oath. Our bodies are all we entail. In Francisco Marquez's poem, The Bulge, the speaker remembers a young and risky awakening. Quote, this new desire, so much like a ghost for a repairman, which can only be understood as, or enhanced by, folded into, aided by the heightened language of religious text. How else to express desire? The speaker remembers. My eyes descended to the bulge, which grew in heft like God, or the mountain on which it said he resides, where Moses received the holy commandments, knowing well all the pain they would bring. Maybe faith is the risk to know you are but an instrument. Let it be with me, I say, according to you. In Timothy Liu's poem, The Price of Kissing is Your Life, We get a more direct critique of all the great literature of the Western tradition, religious and secular, as texts that pale in comparison to the immediacy of bodily pleasure of love. It starts, "His kisses are better than books. One kiss is better than all of war and peace." And later in the poem, "There will be more than plenty of time to peruse great passages bound in leather tomes when our dust has been mingled back into the earth. Let someone else read about what we were, imagine better times than ones they have known." Yet, of course, we realize that at the same time Loose Speaker is making this argument, it is in the form of a poem. In arguing in text against the great texts, both of which can last longer than us, sometimes for centuries, we are shown how in celebrating the body in a poem, we already enter elegy. Time gorges on memory. Faylita Hicks croons to us in A Girl's Trip Home, in a remarkable reading full of literal and beautiful singing. You have to listen to this podcast episode, where they lament our terminal disease, love. Are we shocked at what the body will allow? Jason P. Smith asks in their poem, "I arrive in a place with a high level of psychic distress," revealing to us that everywhere I write, I flail to see God. And you can see there the L is in parentheses, so it's both fail and flail. We began this 5th season of Queer Poem a Day with one of Jericho Brown's duplexes, a repetitive form that he invented, which starts and ends with a version of the same line. The first line is, "I still believe in God. What else keeps me?" The last line is, "I still believe in God. Who else would keep me?" And there's that extra syllable to that last iambic line, which both unsettles and kind of settles us in the ending, giving us a journey that begins with a definition of God as a what and ends as who. Our second to last poem this year, aired today on the day I'm speaking, is The Very Great Elegy, A Display of Mackerel by Mark Doty. In the 1997 collection Introspections, Contemporary American Poets, on one of their own poems, Doty reflects on the creation of this poem, where a chance encounter with a group of iridescent mackerel and ice for sale becomes something much more. You can see that opening and ending of the poem here. The opening, they lie in parallel rows on ice, head to tail, each a foot of luminosity. In this reflection from Introspections, Doty notes the religious words that surprised him in the way they emerged out of the metaphor of mackerel. I'll read a long passage here from Doty. Soul, heaven. The poem had already moved into the realm of theology. But the questions that arose, suppose we could iridesce, startled me nonetheless, because the notion of losing oneself entirely in the universe of shimmer referred both to these fish and to something quite other, something overwhelmingly close to home. The poem was written some 6 months after my partner of a dozen years had died of AIDS. And of course, everything I wrote, everything I saw was informed by that loss, by the overpowering emotional force of it. Epidemic was the central fact of the community in which I lived. Naively, I hadn't realized that my mackerel were already of a piece with the work I'd been writing for the previous couple of years. Poems that wrestled in one way or another with the notion of limit, with the line between being someone and no one. What did it mean to be a self when that self would be lost? To praise the collectivity of the fish, their common identity as flashing participants, is to make a sort of anti-elegy, to suggest that what matters is perhaps not our individual selves, but our brief soldiering in the broad, streaming school of humanity, which is composed of us, yes, but also goes on without us. The one of a kind, the singular, like my dear lover, cannot last, and yet the collective life, which is also us, shimmers on. And the poem ends, how happy they seem, even on ice, to be together, selfless, which is the price of gleaming. These are the conditions of poetry, of the body, of the self, of public language, by which the whole host of elegies, celebrations, desires, and ironies emerge. In What the Dead Can Do by Oliver Baez Bendorf, we're told about the dead that they can't initiate a rainbow, but if one already comes on the sky, they can add one more. And that they hope someone makes love the way they love to. In another elegy, Gabriel Calvo Caressi's Miss You Would Like to Take a Walk with You, the poem itself revives the dead beloved in words, emphasized with that you drop to the next line. I'll read this section from the middle. Miss you, bring the ghost dog. We'll walk past the waterfall and you can tell me about the after. Wish you would come back for a while. Don't even need to bring your skin sack. I'll know you. So, elegy and preservation may be a necessary component of our art, but also in another vein, Esbrook Korfman warns us in her poem Before and After about getting too fixed in the art of the past, starting with a view of a museum closed off from view. I'll read from the opening here. The museum is closed, but fast forward and I will tell you the exhibit underwhelms me. How on a streaming service you can place the cursor over a later point in time and see a still of what comes next without committing. It's like that. Korfman's speaker goes on to question the legacy of Adrienne Rich and her transphobic views. Rich thought change was the only poem, but that only some things could be changed. Gender, for example, could not. And then, stirringly, Korfman asks us, what do we miss if we write only after, meaning after the poems that came before us? Gaya Rajan, in his brilliant poem Essay on Class, also has a speaker processing what a devotion to art or the art world leaves out. Reading from the middle here. For months fell asleep listening to an art collector on the radio. The most he'd say of any acquisition was that it was nice, or even quite nice, which meant about 2 billion. And then the details of medium, the art school the young artist had attended, always one of the 3 most expensive in the cities. The trick was always to avoid awe. The rich participate in beauty, but do not acknowledge it. We avoid awe at art, at desire, maybe because, as Keisha Kuipers tells us in her poem Cremello Horse, in a statement that might echo through many of these poems, it's too short a distance from wonder to terror. Lloyd Schwartz's absolutely classic dialogue poem, Who's on First, has two speakers, lovers, facing off with their multiple interpretations, statements, and understatements, digs, and affections, sometimes heading off wonder and terror, sometimes opening it right up. A couple examples. Couldn't we ever speak to each other without irony? Sure. Why do you like these paintings? What isn't there is more important than what is. Irony can show us what isn't here in poems. Whether we're separated by death or absence, or emotional or physical distance, or the medium of words themselves. In Marcelo Hernandez Castile's poem, Eclogue, A Field Guide and Cure, the speaker considers a more literal separation, a family member, quote, serving life without parole in Folsom Prison. And again, foregrounds the ironies of our language and culture, which might give us the kind of cure the title of the poem promises. The prison museum was named the Big House. I went to school where the football stadium was also called the Big House, where people screamed and screamed. Or later in the poem, you are lovely in the eyes of the state. Another possible cure, the poem On Therapy by Jan Henry Gray, attends to the potential restorative power of language. It begins, say yes when anyone asks. It can happen all of a sudden, without the writing on the wall, some proof that the person is yearning, clawing for language, craving clarity with grace, with gratitude, over time, as a gift and not an exchange. Jazz Sufi's poem Ode to My Lover's Sequin Dress evokes the tradition of the ode and expands from the lover to everything. At first, I saw each sequin as a mirror reflecting, but now I know them all to be prisms refracting you and your infinite wonder, your spectrum of limitless love streaming out and striking like lightning gentled by your touch. What is beauty? This is it, I think. Everything, everything, all. Rose Zinnia's ecstatic poem and self-described, quote, busted self-blazon / info dump in memes, titled, I'm like if Mary Oliver had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, goes to the heart of the texts that condemn us. The word bad comes from the Old English bedel, meaning hermaphrodite, pejorative. Attention is the beginning of devotion, is something Mary Oliver said. My body being stored within the word bad is a form of devotion. A form of devotion. Attention to language as attention to the self and other. Even when language excludes, it includes. Nikki Finney's poem, Charm. It makes me cry. Her reading of it is especially moving. I urge you all to listen to it. Past all the promises of one version of paradise, we find here in this poem true devotion. In this case, because Nikki chose this poem for the context of Queer Poem a Day, we know the devotion depicted here is her parents' love for their queer child. I'm going to read the poem in full. Charm. The two of them, standing on the other side of the airport window. Mama wiping her tears and looking through her purse for anything of hers to lastly give. Daddy with his hands 100 leagues deep in his salty pockets, his black pearls already secretly handed over earlier in the day. The way they stand there, with nowhere else to go or be. Two watch lights watching until the last of me is all the way out of sight. Nobody waits like this anymore. Nobody loves this way anymore. The last poem of Queer Poem a Day, Year 5, airs tomorrow morning, with Ocean Vuong reading his slightly revised version of his poem, The Last Dinosaur, from his 2022 collection, Time is a Mother, which takes on the voice of a dinosaur watching everything around it be destroyed. I'll just read the opening here. When they ask me what it's like, I tell them, imagine being born in a hospice in flames. As my relatives melted, I stood on one leg, raised my arms, shut my eyes, and thought, tree, 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 as death passed me, untouched. I didn't know God saw in us a failed attempt at heaven. Which I might say, of course, that could be a description of poetry or language itself. Later in the poem, we get these lines. Emperor of language, why didn't you master no without forgetting maybe? Queer Poem a Day is the first publication of this newly changed line. So Ocean read it this way and sent us a picture you can see there from his book with a crossed out yes and a maybe in its place. So the original line in the book was, Emperor of language, why didn't you master no without forgetting yes? Now we have Emperor of language, why didn't you master no without forgetting maybe? Another way of saying this, I think, why didn't you use your power of language to not just say no, but also say maybe? Though maybe is less definitive than yes, I find maybe more achievable and therefore more possible and more hopeful. There is always the possibility of a text, religious, cultural, a word from a lover or poem, negating or excluding or damning you, but also maybe something else. Ocean Vuong's speaker goes on to say, I bet the light on this page isn't invented yet. The last line in The Last Dinosaur is, I was made to die, but I'm here to stay. One last note on our music this year. We've gotten many comments this year about our pianist Daniel Baer's hypnotic performance of L'Ange Verrier. I don't speak French well, he does. Or Glass Angel by French composer Reynaldo Hahn. Reynaldo Hahn was Marcel Proust's boyfriend, and many believe Hahn provided inspiration for the famous recurring phrase of music called the Vintuel Sonata, that's how I always said it, that weaves its way through Proust's masterpiece, his 7-volume novel In Search of Lost Time. So as a way of ending my reading of our poems for this year, I'll read something Proust says in the first volume of In Search of Lost Time, Swan's Way, about the Vintuel Sonata. It's one of the best defenses and explanations of art on the edge of tradition and meaning that I know. It also could be about poetry. It expands to encompass everything. The quote starts and ends with a maybe. Maybe it is the nothingness that is real, and our entire dream is non existent. But in that case, we feel that these phrases of music and these notions that exist in relation to our dreams must also be nothing. We will perish, but we have for hostages these divine captives who will follow us and share our fate. And death in their company is less bitter, less inglorious, perhaps less probable. Thank you.
Dylan, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much. And as always, Dylan and I did not discuss each other's capstones before we wrote them or gave them. And it's amazing to see the things that we touch on that are the same. And also, as always, to see how different what we will end up saying about the season is and how it captures so much of what we've been thinking about all season long from different points of view. The Price of Gleaming. I first encountered Mark Doty's poem, A Display of Mackerel, when I was 16. This was also the first year I encountered poetry at all. As a public school student in Illinois, like most of the US, I only arrived to poetry at the end. Without being raised on it, its music was foreign and enigmatic to my ear. And without being raised by it, the central causes of poems, beauty, wonder, pain, transcendence, desire, and the self, were foreign to my being. My English teacher, Jeff Bergerwhite, loves poetry. He read us a poem every day to start class for no other purpose than to have the oral and oral, A-U-R-A-L, tradition give us a meditative moment to gather ourselves before we delved into a given text. We read a lot that year. We read Hamlet and Master and Margarita, Prisoner's Dilemma and Copenhagen, Prufrock and the Second Coming, Musée de Beaux-Arts and Archaic Torso of Apollo, The Fish and Things I Didn't Know I Loved, Faint Music and Celestial Music, and this poem, A Display of Mackerel. I wanted to be a good student. It took a year, but I started to understand how to encounter poems and how to write about them. Doty's poem is a poem in tercets. The uniformity of the stanzas imitates the uniformity of the mackerel, of how they are displayed on ice at the market, and how they are as a species. When we look at them in this context, they all have a head and a tail, black bands and scales, iridescence and prismatics, quote, not a one in any way distinguished from the other, the poem says. The speaker of the poem who is observing the fish takes it even further. Nothing about them of individuality. Instead, they're all exact expressions of the one soul, each a perfect fulfillment of heaven's template, mackerel essence. A good student reads this to mean that the sublime has entered the poem. There's God in the word heaven. There's nature in the word essence. The reader and the speaker transcend from the horizontal axis of being at the market to the vertical axis, where from the ground to the sky, there is beauty and meaning in this mundane thing we just walked upon. The mackerel is a mackerel. That is its essence, whether as one or in the pile of many. That is what shimmers on the ground all the way up to God. The speaker is having an epiphany about the tableau before him, which then gets reflected back at the speaker. Suppose we could iridesce like these and lose ourselves entirely in the universe of shimmer. Would you want to be yourself only, unduplicatable, doomed to be lost? The speaker and the reader have now been joined in cahoots by this little word, we. The speaker breaks the fourth wall and says to us, Would you want to be yourself only? We are, all of us, unduplicatable and doomed. Death is coming, and the mackerel already know. Quote, they don't care, they're dead and nearly frozen, just as, presumably, they didn't care that they were living. All for all, the rainbowed school and its acres of brilliant classrooms. The School of Fish as a unit is composed of each of them, flashing participants, bolting together. And in the poems now, quote, how happy they seem, even on ice, to be together, selfless, which is the price of gleaming. The good student knows that this is a poem about both death and being alive, about the great cycle of our existence and coexistence. A great student might take this reading further, that this is also a poem talking to poems. Before Dodie, there's Elizabeth Bishop. There's her poem, The Filling Station, covered in gasoline and the sun reflecting rainbows off of it. There's Bishop's The Fish. The great student says that unlike Dodie's poem in tercets, Bishop's poem is in a single stanza, and unlike the many mackerel in Dodie's poem, Bishop studies a single fish. Across both poems, though, is the shimmering. Rainbows, isinglass, iridescence, splendor and splendor, rainbow, 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 an oily fabulation indeed. The fish, and the fish reflecting us back to ourselves, living a little longer in the poet's eye, and then the silence of the blank page, and we let it all go. Those students likely got A's on their essays. They moved forward and thought of Bishop and Dodie once in a while, on a trip to the market, on a boat in the Adirondacks, or looking at gasoline swirls iridescing in a puddle in a post-storm sun at a filling station. Maybe one or two of those students saw those poems again in a lit class in college. Maybe they didn't think of the poems again at all. There is a third student, though, one who carries lines around not to catch a fish, but to catch herself. She might not know she's doing it, but once in a while, when she can't catch her foot to ground, there's that voice in her head, fishing for her with, suppose we could iridesce and be yourself only, unduplicatable, doomed, to be lost, and the price of gleaming. This year, our classics book discussion looked at the works of Nikki Giovanni. Giovanni's work as a poet cannot be removed from her work as a community activist. She was a central figure in the Black arts movement. Her life work in arts and letters pushed into our culture as she was always progressing our vernacular and values toward understanding and developing political uses for art. This is the 5th season that Dylan and I have run Queer Poem a Day out of a public library where we both grew up. I have never considered myself an activist or even a community builder. Aside from being on set or in a classroom, I, like many queer people, know I'm other by exile. I have always loved art and encountering it because of the privacy it has afforded me. Sitting in the dark of a theater or being in silence to read are my most sacred spaces. Even if others are nearby, they are not privy to the communing between me and the art. Every year we run the podcast and its programming, though, I let that 16-year-old go and grow into that third student, the one who knows how to hoard the images and the lyric over long spells of time. Even though there is a price to gleaming, one can't pay it without being the gleaming itself. Which is to say that gathering these voices together every year has reminded me that there is a price to being out. And one is out if they are on this podcast with the word queer in its title. While all of this close reading might be in service of analysis, it sometimes has served as erasure. No one told me that Bishop was gay. No one said it about Dodie either. Not one teacher brought it up about Shakespeare, or Whitman, or Dickinson, or Langston Hughes, or Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to go walking on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. The achievement, we're taught, is to arrive at the universal. For the universals across these poems cannot be arrived at without the very real predicament of the writer herself. Soft Animal is devised by a lesbian, and it would take me far too long to understand that the price of gleaming in Dodie's poem was not just death, but a particular kind of death, of a particular school of fish. God and gleaming are all over the poems this season. Rick Barrett's poem Pleasure begins, "You are told to believe in one paradise, and then there is the paradise you come to know." It is universal that we all come to know paradise by different means and images than those portrayed in any house of God. It's also true that the queer poet's reckoning with or rejection of these ideals comes as early as they learn they've been exiled from the book. The stakes get even higher in the title of Timothy Liu's poem, "The Price of Kissing is Your Life." This poem doesn't hide from any expression of homosexuality, as the speaker finds kissing his lover better than all of War and Peace and every other text, texts that these two are left out of for what they do hiding in the stacks. But for the speaker, since, quote, "there will be more than plenty of time to peruse great passages bound in leather tomes when our dust has been mingled back into the earth, he must pursue desire now." Is there a better manifestation of gleaming on a podcast than singing itself? Felita Hicks croons in her reading that even if the car takes, quote, "a third turn towards our terminal disease, love," end quote, it will be lyric. In Jazz Sufi's Ode to My Lover's Sequin Dress, the sequins themselves are in trouble. All of those sequins flirting with the light like every one of them is trying to fall in love tonight. There is a great price to gleaming, to being out in the eyes of the state. We learn this most viciously in Marcelo Hernandez Castillo's Eclogue, A Field Guide and a Cure, when the undocumented becomes agentic and responds to the court. The court recommends an explanation, the last bird thrumming like a nervous finger. I document the oldest tree in existence. I run into a bellflower. I run into a field and clamor of bells. We also learn this in many of the poems by trans poets this season. In Rose Zinnia's poem, I'm Like If Mary Oliver Had Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, the speaker says, the word bad comes from the Old English badal, meaning hermaphrodite, pejorative. Attention is the beginning of devotion, is something Mary Oliver said. My body being stored within the word bad is a form of devotion. And yet the reader is given transcendence that we've done nothing to earn or deserve. The poem ends, the coolest thing about me is probably when you Google my name, you are met with only flowers. The third student gives attention to the poems long after the paper is handed in. Her devotion is something she doesn't have a name for yet. She might not ever have a name for it, but many poems will try. There is a great distance, you see, between her at 16 and now. She'll ask Mark Doty if he'll read a poem for her podcast. She'll get on a Zoom and record him and not know what poem he's about to read. And then he'll begin reciting a display of mackerel. The tercets begin, and now you know it's a waltz. There's an uneven step, a lack of symmetry, a perpetual yearning, the music of death. They lie in parallel rows on ice, head to tail, each a foot of luminosity, barred with black bands, which divide the scale's radiant sections like seams of lead in a Tiffany window. Here is Tiffany glass. Here's what should be clear but is filled with lead, is made in a way that lead holds pieces together. Iridescent, watery prismatics. Think abalone, the wildly rainbowed mirror of a soap bubble sphere. Think sun on gasoline. A mirrored sphere like a disco ball. And abalone and rainbow recalls Bishop, her fish, her rainbows, the lineage of queerness. Splendor, and not a one in any way distinguished from the other. Nothing about them of individuality. Gleaming on ice, all the same. Instead, They're all exact expressions of the one soul, each a perfect fulfillment of heaven's template, mackerel essence. Born as we are in these bodies, circumstances, times, and whatever it is we'll be up against. As if after a lifetime of arriving to the page, to culture, to a body, to others. At this enameling, the jewelers made uncountable examples, each as intricate in its oily fabulation as the one before. Suppose we could iridesce like these and lose ourselves entirely in the universe of shimmer. Would you want to be yourself only, unduplicatable, doomed? Gleaming on Ice, all the same, a poem in 1995. These are the men lost to the AIDS crisis. To be lost, they'd prefer plainly to be flashing participants, multitudinous. Even now, they seem to be bolting forward, heedless of stasis. They don't care they're dead and nearly frozen, just as, presumably, they didn't care that they were living. All for all. The rainbowed school and its acres of brilliant classrooms in which no verb is singular, or everyone is. How happy they seem, even on ice, to be together, selfless, which is the price of gleaming. Some things have gotten easier, but that doesn't always make them easy. I wish I could give that 16-year-old the margin narrative to help fish her out of her turmoil, bring her into her mackerel essence. I'm grateful that her attention stuck long enough to turn into devotion. I'm grateful she is out and gleaming now in the sequin shadows of all of these voices. Thank you.